I'm Julie Legg, author of The Missing Piece and diagnosed with ADHD at 52.
And I'm Gel Legg, diagnosed at 55.
Welcome to ADHD Difference. In this episode, we'll be talking about ADHD Awareness Month, the month of October. Perfect. It's a worldwide awareness campaign, we should say. And this year, the theme is awareness is key. So it hasn't just popped up. The Awareness Month has been going for around 20 years. So in fact, it is the 20th anniversary this year, 2024. So we thought we'd have a chat about awareness and how it has changed since we've been diagnosed, and actually beyond that, when it all started. So I would like to give a big shout out in New Zealand to ADHD New Zealand. They're really the hub of everything to do with ADHD in New Zealand. Really useful tools you'll go to if you're just starting out and you've got a few questions, and they will point you in the right direction. They have events and forums and webinars and all sorts of things that are tailored to suit a certain crowd, whether you're parenting with ADHD or dealing with younger children or just relationship advice. So yay to ADHD New Zealand. But awareness.
Strikes me straight away is we didn't know, actually, because we've only been diagnosed in the last 3 years or so, how long this worldwide ADHD Awareness Month has been going. And so then discovering this appears to be the 20th anniversary. From what we can see, it started in 2004. That sort of struck me straight away as in the last, say, 5 years, there's been a lot of awareness growing of ADHD. It's written about pretty much constantly in the press here and in my native UK, and I read the press there every day. There's barely a day goes by when it doesn't pop up in some format or other. And there's certainly been a fair bit of criticism in the last few years that it seems to be everywhere now and exploding. Well, that's interesting, because since the Awareness Month has been going on at 20 years, it's not really just a last 5-year phenomenon. It's people have been trying to make people aware of it for quite some time. So that's a little thing I just wanted to say there. It's not a flash in the pan thing that's happening now. It's not a trendy new thing. It's people have been working very hard to support people being diagnosed as children, and I would say potentially quite a lot more diagnoses of adults in those last 20 years, not just the last few years.
I agree. And also too, with awareness, with these articles that you talk about, whether it's online or in the press or on the TV or snippets, it kind of, ADHD might be a term that you're more aware of, but actually understanding what ADHD is all about takes a little bit more time, because it's a very complex disorder, or difference as we like to call it. It is really complex, and you can't just say it in a 10-second soundbite, which is, when it comes to author talks that we both attend, and we both have a Q&A at the end of it. There's still a lot of quite basic information that is still on the very top of the question list, so it's not magically everyone's fully informed and on board. It strikes every generation differently, and I think potentially the older generation is still coming to terms with a few misconceptions, and
That's right. Yeah, absolutely, because if you're 14 and struggling with ADHD, your lived experience cannot be expected to be anywhere the same as being 74 and living with ADHD and having lived with it for 6 decades longer. Each are completely valid, and each will have certain similarities, because that's the definition of being diagnosed with ADHD, but the lived experience is very different. So awareness, you could argue, well, I doubt if there's a single adult in this country right now that's never heard of the ADHD. It would be, you'd have to almost live on another planet not to have heard those 4 letters, the key thing, ADHD. But understanding really what it is, That's a whole different thing. As Jules says, when you often read about it in the press, they're small bites of information, and it doesn't explain the whole experience or journey for those diagnosed and living with it, or for those around the people with ADHD. So there's lots of angles to this, but for me, Awareness Week isn't just about us folks with ADHD explaining to other people what ADHD is and making non-ADHD people aware of it. It's a self-awareness too. I think it's becoming as much important that we're aware within this, I don't like the word community. There was another word I was thinking of. Can you remember what it was? Collective. This collective of us folks with ADHD, we don't all experience it the same way. We aren't identical. So even an awareness within ourselves of what ADHD is and how it impacts our lives. So we will go out to those without ADHD and try to explain it, but sometimes perhaps it may confuse people. So you may present to someone, well, my ADHD affects me in this way. And they say, I know someone else with ADHD, but that doesn't happen to them. They have this and this and this. So are you sure it's ADHD? I mean, how do I understand this when you're giving me a completely different set of impacts compared with someone else I know?
Because ADHD is not a one-size-fits-all disorder, and we experience it in very different ways. And, back to the news snippets, sometimes it's dramatise, was that the right term, or dramatic, some major impacts, but that's not for everybody. There are a lot of people, undiagnosed and diagnosed, that go about their day the best that they can, and no one probably knows, and it's one of those things too. We're not suggesting awareness means that you have to disclose it, your diagnosis, to everyone. That's a very personal choice.
Or anyone.
Yeah.
Anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the key thing. That this month is not a point at which we are not a collective that all have to stand together and face this enemy. We do not all have some personal responsibility to do our bit and disclose to everyone around us and push this thing called ADHD. It's very much a personal relationship with it. We do share with, we have shared with family and friends. We're very open about it. We share it with you, the world. And if people pass us into our world, acquaintances come and go, if it's appropriate, if the conversation is the right place to go, we're happy to share it too. So we're making people aware, and yes, we advocate for it, but we don't push it on people that aren't interested.
Yes.
Yeah, so you mustn't get any sense in this month that you must follow all of us and go and tell everyone. For some of you guys, it's you want to keep it really quiet and that's absolutely your right to do that.
But for those that do want to share more information, I think what's really helpful is just correcting some misconceptions or myths about ADHD. We have told some close acquaintances, and very, very interesting responses. Some were, as in, and you're telling me because, it was a non-event, which wasn't particularly helpful, because we would have loved to carry on that conversation and ask what they know about ADHD and bits and pieces. And others are very intrigued. Others will have neighbours or a colleague at work, or maybe a friend's grandchild might have ADHD and they've got lots of questions. Which is really good. But again, our traits aren't necessarily mirrored in everyone else in an identical way. So bearing in mind, if we are telling our story, we say this is how we experience it, not this is how ADHD is for everybody. Because hyperactivity comes up, I think, quite a lot. But you're not that hyperactive little boy running around. No, we're not. In my case, my hyperactivity is a lot inside my brain, lots of thoughts, very, very busy. And that itself can be quite energetic, and at times it can be very animated and come across that way. But I'm not sprinting around, I'm not running marathons or doing anything too overtly hyperactive.
That's a question of how it manifests.
Yeah.
Interesting. In that space, I'd say probably one of the key things that most of us share is an overactive mind that won't settle. But then how does that manifest? It can manifest in very quiet, peaceful things. You may be a great artist, painting and drawing and all the time, or you may be a musician.
Hyper-focus.
Or a marathon runner, or someone who spends a lot of time in the gym getting that out. Just to get those thoughts to settle down, just to get that mental energy sort of just balanced and calming down. So the manifestation is what's the confusing thing when it comes to awareness for neurotypicals to understand what it is. So I think there's lots of people in your life, and I think one of the most important sets of people when it comes to awareness is probably work colleagues and boss, if you're lucky enough to be working. I know some people aren't, and I appreciate that, but it's not necessarily the direct close friends you have, the people that ought to understand you. Otherwise, well, you have to question how good a friend they are if you have to hide it from them, unless you choose to, which is absolutely fine. I've got to keep coming back to that. This is not a crusade, it's choices. But say you choose to be open and have a close friendship with and trust your friends, you should better share it. Different question when it comes to awareness at work, because it can hugely help that your boss understands your ADHD, or it can seriously hinder. There is no absolute one-size-fits-all as to whether you should share with your work colleagues. There is an increasing amount of awareness in the workplace, and certainly in the bigger, more progressive companies. But unfortunately, our country isn't all big progressive companies. There's lots of small ones that really don't have the time, energy, or interest in looking at these things.
Anecdotally, I'll just add on the workplace and who to tell. In the missing piece, a lot of women diagnosed as adults really shared their personal experiences. So on the workplace side of things, they some found it really helpful, and all of a sudden there was some understanding when they were overwhelmed or when they needed some help prioritizing, for example. And there were others that felt that they were being patronized perhaps, or they were being micromanaged because... And again, I think it's this lack of understanding. Maybe they felt with ADHD that you're a lesser, I don't know, you have less capacity or less ability, which is completely untrue. We are just as capable as any other living person on the planet. 100%. We just go about things slightly differently. And that's where I think the awareness can really help. Maybe, doing things our way to achieve a task rather than following the standard narrative, which doesn't quite work for us, or we don't understand why to go the long way when we can take the shortcut, in some situations. So being aware is really cool. But again, it's self-awareness too, isn't it? In the workplace, when you go, I'm just not focusing on my work, it's just too noisy. We have the ability, whether we disclose our diagnosis or not, to just ask if we can go into a meeting room and finish things off in peace and quiet. We still have that ability. We don't need to spill it all necessarily. Yeah.
So when we started our awareness process, of course, the first thing we do is tell family, because they're the most important people in our lives. So that's a process of making them aware. And there's various, none of it was negative in terms of reactions, but there are different reactions that come along. First of all, sort of almost nonplussed might be there. It's like, okay, well, there's a bit of processing involved for someone when you have been around for 50 years or more, and you suddenly say to family, we do have an official neurodivergence going on here, and it's something that is kind of key to who we are. They need to reprocess that, and over time the questions start getting asked, and that's all fine. But in our experience, we know, speaking from ourselves, we did find ourselves using lots of phrases, but we don't have this bit, but it doesn't affect us in this way, it affects us in this way and this way. So that is taking ownership and responsibility of how it affects you. And then in that process, making it clear to them. So just because you now go and read about ADHD or see a news article on the television about it, doesn't mean that we fall into that category necessarily of manifesting of behavior or how it affects us. So that is what I think is this kind of creating awareness, empowering someone who is now aware of us to go out and be a little bit more aware of other people that then present or describe themselves as having or diagnosed with ADHD. And that really does still, that is obviously it's the primary purpose of this is for us ADHD people to make non-ADHD people more aware of how we live our lives, what goes on for us. But I do still personally have this thing that we also should be making each other in the ADHD world a little more aware. Some of us just can't function with it. Life is a mess. And some of us can function on some levels quite well. And we
extremely well at times,
and we must be, I hate the word kind, but it is an important word. We have to also start by being understanding and aware and kind to each other within the ADHD world and accepting we all have a different relationship with it and it manifests differently, and be supportive of each other. I think that's my little bugbear, is we need a lot of that in our own world, because if we fight each other or be negative in our own world, it makes it harder for people outside of our ADHD world to really get a grip of what that we want from them in terms of understanding.
And what could that look like, for example? Could it be, oh, well, it's okay for you? This is to ADHD is having a discussion. It's okay for you.
And we do see that.
That's not quite. It's not
okay
a fair
for
conversation.
No. The thing is, it's different for you,
yes,
and I respect that. But mine's like this. I can understand and respect that. And then when we turn and face towards the neurotypicals, and we explain our situation, for this person, you'll find this. For me, it's this. You just need to understand what we have in common is this thing called ADHD. It is a divergence. It is a disorder. But you have to just understand that you can't treat us the same necessarily.
The other thing is quite interesting is I think age. Because at Author Talks, generally it's audience attending, generally middle age, right through to their 80s. We also get younger folk too that are newly married or just partnering up and have got lots of questions as well. So, but some of the older attendees they're very mystified by the whole thing. They've spent 80 years undiagnosed and they're coming to terms with, that's their whole life, huge. And they've seen a lot of things, and they've experienced a lot of things, and they've actually managed, whether it was strategy or just gut instinct. Same with us in a way. We've managed some of our traits naturally because we had to for survival and for just to clear our heads. And so for us, we've moved a location and we've moved jobs quite a bit. And friend sets, for example, we've gravitated towards what would be a happier life for us. And so a lot of older adults would have done that too. So then at 80 to go, but I've got ADHD, but I'm here. And then to have the GP to say, oh, you've made it this far, love. Or you've got a PhD. No, I don't think you've got ADHD. But you've got a successful career, or you've managed to raise your family okay. That's not particularly helpful. So it's not just us with awareness raising. There's a lot happening too in the medical profession, from psychologists through to occupational therapists, through to the GP. They're raising their awareness too, which helps us. But what I'm saying is that age can have a factor. So someone having a terrible time at 20, their ADHD may look slightly different for someone at 70, just purely through life experience.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things there. I think one thing that jumps out for me is this word misconceptions. as I say, I don't believe there's probably a single human being alive in New Zealand that isn't aware of what ADHD is on some vague level. I challenge anyone to find me someone that's never heard the expression, the term. They just, no, I've never heard of that. It's impossible. But the misconceptions, they're the things that need tidying up. And perhaps this awareness month, and for 20 years has been doing this, and hopefully we'll go on for another 20 years if necessary. I'll come back to that in a sec. It's like the misconceptions are where the issues and the problems lay. That's where the falsehoods of what it is and and the assumptions and the judgments made because of those misconceptions. So we do have perhaps a shared duty if we're going to talk about it. Even if we don't disclose that we are ADHD ourselves, we can still go into a conversation and say, well, I've read that that's not actually the case. You can input that still without revealing your hand. That's just an everyday conversation. Two neurotypicals can have that conversation. Someone who is supportive of ADHD or has an ADHD children or partner. That's very important. Go on. Yes. I can tell Julie wants to say something.
I was something got me the other day. There are adults who will say, I didn't get child diagnosed, even though the doctor said it probably is ADHD. I didn't want to get them diagnosed because I didn't want them to have a label that might affect their working prospects, or, I didn't want them to be hindered. Now that's it was pointed out that was quite an ableist thing to say, because having ADHD is identifying where there is problems, but it doesn't mean that your life's ruined. There are so many tools and strategies now available. There is medication if that's helpful or required, but it can be really positive change can come about from a diagnosis. It doesn't have to be this label. And I know that there are a lot of people who may be listening that don't like a label. They don't wear it with pride, and they would disagree that there's a sort of a sunny outlook to come. But believe me, it is there. And you've got to be willing to adapt and take on some of these changes because, there is some sunshine out there.
Coming back to that wee point I'm going to come back to.
Good on you.
So we had 20 years of this month. I guess this isn't frivolous. I'm not being frivolous. I guess if we succeed, then it shouldn't have to run for more than another 20 years. We should get to a point where ADHD is just, oh, well, I'm hard of hearing. Oh, well, I'm colorblind. If you're colorblind, okay, well, that doesn't affect anything going on here, or it can affect this. Perhaps you can't be an electrician with a certain, but hang on, it's not just colorblind full stop. Which colors do you struggle with? Because I've worked with engineers, and I was an electronics technician and stroke engineer for many years, where you can imagine all the colors of wires. Colors are really important, but you can work in certain environments. Being colorblind, you just may not be allowed to work where it involves mains electricity, with the stuff that's enough to hurt you or kill you. But lots of electronics is really safe. Voltage is very small, and you'd be surprised how much you can work around that. Yeah, if you say I'm colorblind, that's the end of the story, and everyone assumes, oh, okay. There's always still a lot of explaining to go on, but we may get to the point with ADHD where there should be just a general education coming up over the years where the awareness becomes less important. Isn't that the end goal? Yes. We don't do we have? Perhaps we have colorblind awareness week. I don't know. Perhaps we have hearing impairment week. Maybe we do. But again, I'd struggle to find a human that didn't understand someone who was hearing impaired, surely. So I don't know, but we've got a way to go yet. We do have a way to go. We do. But we're fully behind this, and we would like to say, yes, it is ADHD Awareness Month, October, but we'd like to say that it's ADHD Awareness Month every month, because everything that can be done or anything that we can do just to help normalise the ADHD conversation has got to be a good one. And particularly if you're there to
answer questions and to help sort out a few grey areas for people, that's awesome.
For us, every day is ADHD Awareness Day. It's what we live with, and it does framework our relationship to everything now. That doesn't mean it's a bunch of negative things. It's just it's a tool. It frameworks our decisions we make and how we go through life and how we relate to situations and emotions that are thrown in our direction. So yeah, go out there if you want, if you feel strong enough about it, and either say nothing and do nothing, and that's fine, or maybe go out and maybe in this 1 month you have a conversation with someone that raises their awareness. But please, I think it's really important if you're having that conversation, start from the empowerment on our side and explain to someone who really would like to know but knows nothing about it. It is not one size that fits all. Certain criteria, which I won't go over again because I always forget them, to be honest, but certain criteria do define us having this disorder or difference. And then from then, it's all about the manifesting. And so when that person walks away from the conversation with you, please make sure they don't have it all nailed and all ADHD people are the same. It's a range of things.
Yes. And if you've got any questions, self-education is really good too. So if you're unsure about anything, listen to a few podcasts, read a few books or articles, and just make sure that that you're comfortable having those conversations because you're armed with the knowledge that you need. So thank you for listening, and this is ADHD Awareness Month.